The klaxon was a physical thing, a blade of sound that hammered its way through the deck plates, through the soles of his boots, and into the marrow of his bones. It was a sound designed for panic, a primal shriek of synthesized terror that bypassed reason and went straight for the lizard brain. Red light pulsed in time with the noise, strobing across the sterile white walls of the MedBay, turning the puddles of the captain's blood into glistening slicks of black jerry. With a deafening pneumatic hiss and the final, tomb-like thud of reinforced steel, the blast door slammed shut, sealing them in quarantine. The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence between klaxon bursts, a clinical term for a cage, a sterile label for a death sentence. Kael's mind, a machine honed by years of reacting to klaxons, just like this one, processed the tactical data with brutal efficiency. One entrance, now sealed. No other exits. Life support on an independent, localized loop. But for how long? Communications undoubtedly severed at the mainframe. They were an island, a self-contained problem the hegemony had just defined, isolated, and was now preparing to solve. The solution, he knew, would be permanent. It would be cauterized from the official record. He could feel the lie of it in his teeth, a sour metallic taste that had nothing to do with the coppery tang of blood in the air. This wasn't a biological quarantine. This was a data quarantine. They hadn't been sealed in with a contagion. They were the contagion. The truth they had uncovered on that log, the knowledge that the hegemony was deliberately withholding the key to fighting the Xenomorphids, was a virus far more dangerous to the established order than any alien spoke. And they were the carriers. Sloane was already moving, her own training overriding the panic that had to be screaming inside her. She was a whirlwind of controlled motion, her face a mask of professional focus under the strobing red lights. His pressure is cratering, she bit out, her hands flying over the captain's mangled suit, trying to attach a fresh biomonitor patch to a patch of skin, not slick with gore. I'm losing him, the Captain Valerius made a sound, a wet, rattling gargle. That was less a word and more the noise of a drowning engine trying to turn over one last time. His one good eye, a sliver of terrified blue in a face bruised purple, found Kael. The desperation in that gaze was a physical weight. Another atmosphere of pressure, pressing down on his chest. Kael knelt, the crunch of crystalline dust under his knee, a grim reminder of the ship that had brought this hell down upon them. He leaned close, the reek of ozone and cooked flesh from the captain's wounds filling his nostrils. "Captain," he said, his voice a low command, steady and sure in a way he didn't feel. What did you find?" The log was corrupted. "We need to know." It was a gamble. The man was dying, his mind likely a fractured mess of pain and shock. But the Endeavor hadn't run. It had come back. A ghost ship piloted by a madman on a singular final mission. A mission to deliver a message. Valerius's lips, cracked and blue, moved. A whisper, thin and reedy, bubbled past the blood. Not a weapon. Kael leaned closer, his ear almost touching the man's mouth. The world narrowed to that dying breath, the pulsing red light. The frantic beeping of the monitor Sloane was trying to stabilize. What isn't a weapon? The frequency? The frequency. The captain's eye rolled, searching for a memory. It's a key unlocks them. Their genesis. He coughed, a thick, bloody spray that spattered Kael's faceplate. Kael didn't flinch. Hegemony. Didn't find it. They made it. The linkers, the signal. They're not listening. They're calling. The blood in Kael's veins turned to ice. It wasn't a weakness. It was a trigger, a command protocol, a leash. The hegemony wasn't fighting a war against an alien species. They were culling a herd of their own creation, a biological weapon that had slipped its chain. And they were doing it in the most profitable way possible, by feeding it their own citizens. The contribution cycle wasn't just a path to Mars. It was the grinder, feeding bodies to a war that was never, ever meant to be won. A war fought to be lost, over and over, to maintain control. The sheer, breathtaking cynicism of it stole the air from his lungs. It was a revelation so vast and so vile, it felt like staring into the abyss and seeing the abyss stare back with the cold, calculating eyes of a corporate accountant. Beside him, Jax made a choked sound. The boy was curled into a ball near the bulkhead, his hands pressed so hard against his ears. Kael was afraid he'd fracture his own skull. His eyes were screwed shut, his body trembling with a violence that wasn't just fear. He was a radio receiver caught between two warring stations, and the static was tearing him apart. "They're coming," Jax whispered, his voice thin and tight with psychic agony. The boots, so heavy. All the same, marching. They're angry. They're afraid of what we know. Sloane, Kael snapped, his mind kicking back into gear. The rage would come later. The despair could wait. Survival was a series of immediate, executable tasks. Forget him. He is gone. What can we use? Her head shot up, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and defiance. I'm a medic. I don't just forget my patient. He is not a patient anymore, Kael said, his voice flat and cold as the void. He is a witness who just gave his testimony. And in about 5 minutes, he is going to be a corpse. And so are we if we don't get out of this box. He grabbed her arm, his grip hard, forcing her to look at him. To see past the dying man and at the sealed door. They're not coming to ask questions, Sloane. They're coming to sterilize the room. What in here can get us through that door? Her gaze flickered around the MedBay, the medic's inventory assessment replaced by a scavenger's desperate search. Her eyes, intelligent and sharp, cataloged every piece of equipment, biofoam applicators, laser scalpels, crash carts. Her eyes landed on the defibrillator unit on the crash cart. The door lock is electronic, a dedicated power surge. If I can bypass the safety regulators on the capacitor, how much of a surge? Enough to fry every circuit in a 10-meter radius, she said, her mind already working the problem, including every monitor in here, and us, if we're not grounded, Jax, Kael commanded, his voice softening slightly. The boy was their key, their compass. The door. Tell me what you see, Jax whimpered, rocking back and forth. Metal. Wires. A small box inside. Red light. A green light that has gone dark. The locking bolt control, Sloane confirmed, already pulling the defibrillator cart away from the wall. The wheels squeaked, a small, obscene sound in the tense silence. If I can pump enough voltage directly into the conduit, then do it. Kael moved to the door, pressing his ear against the cold steel. He could hear it now, what Jax was feeling. A low, rhythmic thudding, the sound of mag-locked boots on metal decking, moving with purpose. Moving with inevitability. They weren't running, they were marching. A firing squad on its way to an execution. We don't have time for if. He turned back to the room. His own past rose up to choke him, the ghost of his last command. The failure that had stripped him of his rank and dumped him into the abyss. He was giving orders again, making life or death calls for people who had the misfortune of being near him. The old weight settled on his shoulders, familiar and suffocating. He was Kael Voss, the disgraced officer, leading another squad into a meat grinder. Only this time, the grinder was the entire hegemony. Get me the paddles, Sloane ordered, her voice cutting through his internal haze. She was wrestling with a thick power cable snaking from the back of the cart, her knuckles white. I need to strip the housing. Kael grabbed a laser scalpel from a tray. He adjusted the emitter to its highest intensity, a thin, angry red beam slicing through the air with a faint hum. He handed it to her. Use this. She took it without a word, her earlier idealism burned away by the acid of their reality. She was all pragmatism now. A survivor, she sliced through the thick rubber shielding of the cable, exposing the bundled copper wires within. The smell of burnt plastic filled the air. The thudding from the corridor was louder now, closer. It was accompanied by the sharp, metallic clatter of rifles being readied. There at the junction, Jax breathed, his eyes still screwed shut. Forming a perimeter. They're not trying to get in. They're waiting. Waiting for what? The order, or for something else. Kael's blood ran cold. The gas, a neurotoxin or a simple nerve agent, pumped through the vents. A clean, quiet solution. No mess, no fuss. Just 3 more bodies to be recycled. Sloane now. He roared. Ground yourselves, she yelled back, jamming the stripped end of the power cable into the service conduit next to the door's control panel. Sparks showered the deck, smelling of ozone and impending violence. She grabbed the defibrillator paddles, the heavy plastic cool and solid in her hands. Kael, the capacitor needs to charge. Get ready to hit the panel the second the charge is delivered. It'll only be fried for a moment before the emergency backups kick in. Kael pressed his back against the opposite bulkhead, trying to insulate himself from the floor. He watched the charge indicator on the defibrillator climb, a slow, agonizing crawl of green light up a vertical bar. The machine emitted a rising, high-pitched whine like a fly trapped in a jar, a sound that drilled directly into his brain. Every cycle of the klaxon, every pulse of the red light felt like a tick of a clock, counting down to his own extinction. The thudding in the hall had stopped. They were in position. The silence was somehow worse than the marching. It was the silence of a predator that has cornered its prey. The whine of the defibrillator reached its peak, a piercing shriek that vibrated through the deck. Clear Sloane screamed. She slammed the paddles together. There wasn't a flash, but a sickening thump and a wave of pure energy that Kael felt in his fillings. The lights in the MedBay flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness, broken only by the intermittent, blood-red sweep of the emergency klaxon. The main lights on the door panel sparked violently and went dark. Now, Kael, now. He launched himself across the room, his motion a pre-planned muscle memory explosion. His fingers found the emergency release panel next to the main lock by touch alone. He slapped his palm against it, a desperate, frantic prayer to a machine god. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The silence stretched, infinite and mocking. He could feel the pressure of the enforcer's gaze through the solid steel, feel the weight of their silent judgment. This was it. The final, pathetic failure of Kalen Voss. Then, with a groan of tortured metal and a sharp hiss of depressurizing hydraulics, the locking bolts began to retract. It was the slowest, most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He didn't wait for the door to open fully. He shoved his shoulder into the gap the second it was wide enough, gritting his teeth against the strain. Metal scraped against metal. He could feel the sheer, unyielding mass of the door resisting him. He was a piece of grit in a vast, uncaring machine. "Help me," he grunted, his muscles screaming in protest. Sloane was there in an instant, adding her weight to his. Together, they forced the door open another foot, then another. A sliver of the corridor was visible, a chaotic canvas painted in the same pulsing red light. Personnel in gray station jumpsuits were running, screaming, a tide of pure, undirected panic. And at the far end of the corridor, standing like statues of obsidian and menace, were the enforcers. Their polished black armor drank the red light, making them look like holes cut in the fabric of reality. Their helmeted faces were impassive, inhuman. They raised their pulse rifles, the targeting lasers slicing through the smoky air like crimson scalpels. "Go! Jax, go!" Kael yelled, shoving the boy through the gap. Jax stumbled out into the hallway, a small, terrified figure, in a sea of chaos. Sloane followed right behind him, grabbing his arm and pulling him along. Kael hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes locking onto the approaching enforcers. His military training screamed at him, find cover, lay down suppressing fire, create a breach point. But he had no weapon. He had a medic and a psychic child. This wasn't a tactical retreat. It was a desperate flight. The old war was over. This new one, the one fought in secrets and lies, had just begun. And its first battle was to simply run. He squeezed through the gap and threw his full weight back against the door. The hydraulics were already trying to force it shut. He couldn't stop it, but he could slow it down. Buy them seconds. The heavy steel pressed against him, a final, crushing act of the hegemony's will. With a final, desperate roar, he kicked off the frame and scrambled away as the blast door slammed shut with a boom that echoed like the final closing of a coffin lid. Red laser dots danced across the corridor walls around them, converging on their position. The air crackled with the sharp, distinctive hum of charged plasma coils. They were exposed, unarmed, and squarely in the crosshairs. The war, Kael thought with a surge of black, bitter clarity, was already lost. All that was left was to choose how you fell.